Victoria 3 is a complicated beast, it would be fair to say, and that means that there's plenty of opportunity to make some unfortunate mistakes. In this video, I'll take you through some of the most common mistakes I've seen people make and how you can avoid them, some tips to improve in Victoria 3. If you like this kind of content and strategy games more broadly, please do consider subscribing. Victoria is shooketh at the level of people who are watching but not yet subscribing, and it would be great to have you on board. Anyway, let's not muck about. Let's jump straight in. The first mistake people make, particularly if you're playing a nation like Spain, or as we go down the list and get into the more minor, really minor nations, is that they overlook the fact that their populations are just not supporting a healthy economy. What do I mean by that, and how can you tell? Well, one of the most simple ways is to click on a state. We want to navigate through to a couple of other tabs to get a feeling for the big thing, unused arable land. For every level of unused arable land, one subsistence farming building is automatically created. These things are just as bad in some cases not quite, but very similar to having simply unemployed populations. Subsistence buildings, not just farms, are ineffective. They provide a little bit to the market, but largely they're just built to keep the peasants who work there alive, and it doesn't provide them a very good quality of living, that standard of living. It's therefore pretty imperative that you should try and move away, where possible, from any kind of subsistence buildings within your economy. And generally speaking, depending on who you're playing, unless you're playing some of the real top dogs or nations with very few states within them, you're going to have a lot of wasted potential. A lot of people who are stuck as peasants working in subsistence buildings. Farms are the worst by far. Other types are available. You want to try and avoid this at all costs by providing them opportunity to work, whether that's later in the game by filling up the arable land with farms like wheat farms here, tobacco plantations to provide slightly better jobs, or in the earlier game simply providing employment for unemployed people. A reminder, of course, you can check unemployment at any time, just like the rest of the statistics to do with your populations in the population tabs, to get a feel for whether unemployment is a significant issue for you as well. As they're sitting on the beachside in Barcelona, another thing that I notice a lot of people mistake is just how the taxes work in Victoria 3, and which ones you should be using and which ones you shouldn't. So let me give you the quick and dirty run over for taxation in Vic 3. The overall tax level will be your best way to fundraise, generally speaking. Raising it up will increase the number or percentage of radicals from standard of living. This could potentially threaten the stability of your country, so keep in mind you can check the radicals up here at any time. Outside of that, though, you really only lose a little bit of legitimacy. I would therefore recommend that you absolutely raise taxes too high. You could probably even get away with very high, especially in times of war where extra fundraising is needed. Jumping over consumption taxes for a minute, I would also just quickly note that these wages, the implications of lowering these are relatively insignificant, especially if you don't like the interest group. Military wages for the armed forces, of course, and government wages provide approval for the intelligentsia. If you don't especially care about that, it's pretty safe to smash these down, potentially all the way, although a -5 approval is fairly heavy. If you don't already know, or you need to check in at any time, you can navigate to the government screen and then head your way over to any interest group that you like and check how they stand with you. If they move below -5, you'll start to receive penalties, and if they move above +5, you'll start to receive benefits based on the interest group. So you might want to keep that in mind as you're going through and raising and lowering these taxes to balance the books, but generally speaking, you can probably get away with at least lowering one of these, saving you a considerable amount of money. Finally, as I canvass which of my states are doing well and which are doing not so well, we should also remember consumption taxes. And here I have some really quick advice for you that I think you need to follow, because there's a lot of mistakes made here. It is my opinion and best interest that you should not, or let me soften that slightly, at the very least should avoid taxing the following things. Grain. Everybody eats grain. Try and avoid taxing grain if possible, even though the returns are very high. Liquor and similar shall we say, more nefarious goods. These do provide a standard of living to people who otherwise struggle to achieve a standard of living in Victoria 3. Again, avoid these if possible. Instead, I would encourage you to tax the following. Firstly, services. These are always in high demand. I know it's difficult, but they provide a great return and they're a really solid tax to introduce, unlike grain. Next, you'll want to avoid the more basic things in general, like wood or furniture, and then prioritize the more luxury items. Again, these won't impact the people right at the bottom, so you won't end up with a real revolutionary underbelly within what are probably majority of your population, the peasants and those people on the subsistence farms we looked at earlier. That's why instead we should focus on things like luxury furniture, porcelain, these kinds of goods. But you should, of course, tailor it depending on which ones you're producing and buying in your economy. By and large, tax the luxury items and services and stay away from most other things. And you can see by fixing up a few of those mistakes, the Spanish economy is roaring and soaring. It's at this point that a player might forget that they're actually operating within a wider world that's not just them fixing taxes. And it's here that I would encourage you to jump to the diplomatic lens, or however you'd like to navigate to this screen, and just check on your interests. Where do you have declared interests? Do you have declared interests in regions that you might be interested in exploring or taking over? If not, it might be time to get rid of some and assign some new ones so that you can reach out exactly where you want to go. Here too, I would also note the green versus the red. Who are your friends and who are your enemies? It can be a good idea to start improving relations or damaging relations, depending on who you want to be on your side. It pays, especially if you're playing as a smaller nation, to have at least one neighboring major power on your side. You really will enjoy the benefits of having a friend nearby, especially if it comes to wartime and the AI needs to come and save your backside. So I would encourage you to at least build up good relations with one friend. The next thing we need to talk about, the elephant in the room, is construction. So construction will be one of the largest taxes on your economy, or at least when it gets rolling. The industry is very expensive, both to build and to upkeep. So you'll notice at the moment we're cruising around, filling up our reserves. I currently have nothing in construction. Let's say I wanted to first build some construction sector. A reminder, this consumes good and increases employment. It also costs you money. So don't go too overboard with these. A big mistake that could easily be made would be to spam out a lot of these. I would suggest you don't do that. Reason being, they will add up and eventually cost you money over time. And while they do use some things, they're not really what we're targeting. We should instead be looking to, again, provide opportunity for our pops, maybe fill gaps in our economy by looking at, say, the market screen and filtering by market price to see what's especially expensive within our economy. Whatever we choose to do, we'll note that the temporary national expenses of producing things can be somewhat expensive, especially dependent on what you're building. But here's the thing, Victoria 3 is of course an economic simulator at its heart, and so actually don't be put off by the temporary expenses incurred with construction. You should be, ideally, using all of the money that you have coming in. And yes, of course, in this little gold reserves bar here, it can be useful to have that somewhat full, in case somebody declares war or something goes entirely wrong in the economy. However, if you've just got money sitting around doing nothing, it is doing just that, nothing, while your people continue to maybe suffer, or while industries and resources aren't being exploited. I can click into any resource tile here and see that we're just simply not getting any of this coal, or iron, or fish, or logs, or lead. I may not need all of these things, but if we've got money coming in sitting around doing nothing, it is a waste of our nation's potential. My advice here then, and the most common mistake that's being made, is that people aren't putting enough into their urban, rural buildings. Yes, development is nice, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And the construction sector, important, of course, but we need to get more goods, more resources, and better jobs going so that we can move up through the tech tree, if you will, and start producing more advanced goods, improving the quality of life of our many populations, those still struggling on subsistence farms in this territory in particular, and also improving, of course, the GDP of our entire nation. My final tip here then is to make sure that you're pumping as much excess cash as you have into building things for your economy at all times. And sometimes those things may be war related. Of course, as we know in Victoria 3, if we navigate to the buildings and then go to the development tab, we can build barracks. And these barracks are the things that give us battalions, permanent battalions, for our generals to command in times of war. We also, however, have conscription centres. These allow us to quickly pull in conscripted troops to defend or attack. These are the key to keeping your economy alive in the early game, because barracks, while they are brilliant, are expensive. They're expensive to build, they're expensive to maintain, and when mobilized during times of war, they are very expensive, which we'll see in just a little bit. The best way to ensure that you have a lot of troops available to you at the start of the game is therefore not to build a million bajillion military developments. Avoid that mistake at all costs. Instead, you should navigate here to the army model screen. Take a look at this. Peasant levies, often by default, can mobilize 73 battalions and various other impacts. Professional army, which I'm on by default, which you might think would be the best one, is actually not. This is, of course, designed for purely our professional troops from barracks, and it gives us a lot of ability to build barracks. However, only mobilizing 33 troops, look instead at National Militia, can mobilize 195 troops, thanks to the extra levels within our conscription centres and the increased conscription rate, and it's similar for mass conscription, although slightly different because this also favours the barracks in terms of buffs. National Militia is the key winner here. You need to try and enact National Militia to get the most out of your conscripts and therefore not have to fund a very slow, sluggish and expensive war economy by having a whole load of troops fully trained and on standby. Another very common mistake that I see people make, and this one I get comments about all the time, so please listen carefully here, is the addition of extra war goals. So a lot of people will say, oh, I'm going to war and I end up with just this one little state, and that's because that's all you've declared to conquer. Here you can see I have one war goal. It's to conquer literally this single part of Portugal right here, just the southern state. Of course, this state here is completely different. This one's completely different again. There are 3 different pieces to Portugal, and I'm only declaring to conquer one. I therefore need to add conquer state and then add an additional state to the war goal. I need to keep doing this for every state that I want to end up taking. This will add a little bit more infamy, as you can see, and it will be limited, so you can't just go completely crazy. But it's really important for you that you at least come away with what you're after so you don't end up with some horrendous border gore. So make sure that you declare over all the territories that you actually want in a war. Very important. And don't miss the opportunity to maybe bring in a friend as well with an obligation. Generally tends to be a good idea, but the one that I really wanted to communicate was adding those extra war goals. You'll notice that the costs of constructing goods and now the costs of goods for military buildings and military wages are going off the charts. They are incredibly high, even for a relatively small war like this between Spain and Portugal. Keep in mind that any prolonged conflict with additional war goals will take longer to complete, and this will put an incredible strain on your economy. It is for that reason that there's a couple of other small pieces of advice here. Firstly, make sure you have enough in gold reserves in case something goes wrong. And secondly, you might want to actually just avoid this messy warfare at all, especially in the early game when you still have populations working in subsistence farms and you need to really build up industry and unlock better technologies before pushing out too far, i.e. build up what you've got, then focus on the rest, tends to be a good idea. Once you prove successful in your conflict, like I did here, thanks to pushing the Portuguese front line really aggressively, and ignoring the French one because they only had one war goal, and it was for me to give them a regime change in Cuba. So that's exactly what I did. Neat. Now that we have all of this territory under our control, our economy is back in the green again, but you'll notice that the cost of those military buildings, those barracks, and potentially military wages remain high. It's for that reason, of course, to remind you back to the start of the video that we can tinker with these things a little bit through low military wages, but at the end of the day, if we have a lot of barracks built, they're just going to cost a lot of money, while also, of course, providing battalions and jobs. It's a careful balance to be had. but I'd encourage you to rely on your conscripts and changing laws earlier on for some faster action and defense. And what's this over here? The unsung hero. It's the Cultures tab. Might not seem super exciting, I realize, but under the nation formation screen, you get some really spicy things. This is how you form a new nation in Victoria 3. Here you can see, playing as Spain, I can form Iberia, providing I control all of the territories I need. Now, I've just taken some of them. Portugal has some more. Maybe I should have puppeted them. And then this one is split between Spain and Great Britain. Of course, it's Gibraltar. Either way, this is how you form new established nations. And there are many to choose from. Popping over here to New South Wales, mate, you can see that we can form the Kingdom of Australia if we can manage to grab all of this, and New Zealand. Big yikes. But it's there nonetheless. Another nation that, of course, isn't there from the start, but can be formed. Another one that is hotly contested, of course, the nation forming of India. This one, a particular challenge given all of the different groups. However, many of them do align on certain things, so you can use both diplomacy and or war to bring this one together. The opportunities are endless, and just like releasing puppeted states, there are many, many different ambitions to shoot for. Here, Gran Colombia, for example. There's really a lot of fun to be had behind the scenes and in some of the less well-known things inside of Victoria 3. I'd encourage you to give it a go. Maybe even head over here as a bonus one to the map list. Filter by all sorts of things to try and get a feel for maybe some different nations that you haven't quite tried yet. Rank by GDP. Maybe you rank by standard of living. The United Tribes of New Zealand. One of my favorite fun facts. Who knows? The opportunities are endless. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you all next time.